That stepmother destroyed her own wedding in 15 minutes. My stepmom was walking down the aisle when I realized I made a horrible mistake. The cracker I was eating had peanuts. I'm so sorry, but I need my EpiPen, I gasped, already feeling my throat itch. Those had peanuts. My new stepmom Veronica looked over, her face turning red. Oh my gosh, are you seriously doing the TikTok allergy trend at my wedding? This isn't a trend. My tongue was already thickening. Give me your phone. She marched over, extensions swaying. I'm not faking, but she grabbed my phone from the table. Marco, she called to her brother. Collect all the kids' phones. We're not having this go viral as bride ruins teens prank. My chest started burning from the inside. I had 8 minutes before I couldn't breathe. The number burned into my brain from the hospital. Dad! I stumbled toward him. My EpiPen is in the car. He didn't even look at me. Addison, we discussed this. No drama. I'm having an allergic reaction. The wedding guests started murmuring. Veronica's family glared at me like I was trash. Dad's side of the family hadn't even come. They'd all refused after meeting Veronica. Now I understood why. Her brother Marco was going table to table with a basket. Put your phones in, kids. Bride's orders. My 13-year-old cousin Keith tried to sneak his phone under the table, but Marco grabbed his wrist. Nice try, kid. That's when my bio sister Ellie ran straight at me. Veronica's sister grabbed her arm. Let your sister finish her performance. She's not performing, Ellie screamed. Look at her face. My lips were swelling. My skin felt like fire ants were crawling under it. I tried to push past Veronica's sister, but she shoved me back. Hard. Please, I wheezed. My EpiPen. Your father told me about these stunts, Veronica said loudly. How you faked sick when he dated Patricia. How you pretended to faint when he proposed to me. Blood started dripping from my nose. My body's panic response. 5 minutes left. Ellie broke free and ran toward my purse on the gift table. Veronica's mother blocked her. Sit down, little girl. She's dying, Ellie sobbed. That's when Keith's little sister started screaming at the top of her lungs. Help! Help! Someone's dying! Over and over. Other kids joined in. Help! Help! Shut those brats up! Veronica shrieked. She's embarrassing this family, Veronica's mother said over the screaming, just like her mother did. My dead mother, who died of anaphylaxis when I was 8. The irony burned worse than my throat. Veronica's daughter Bethany stood up. Mom, she's actually turning blue. Not you too, Veronica snapped. I'm not letting her ruin this like she ruins everything. But Mom, Bethany Marie, you defend me right now or you're grounded for summer. 3 minutes left. Thump, thump, thump. My heart was racing so fast it hurt. This is it, my brain whispered. This is how Mom felt. Through my swollen eyes, I saw Ellie fighting against 3 adults to get to my purse. Keith had started accidentally knocking over flower arrangements, creating chaos. Oops! Control these children! Veronica shrieked. When no one was looking, I dragged myself across the floor towards the panic button in the kitchen. My lungs felt like paper bags, crumpling smaller with each breath. Look at her, Veronica cackled, crawling for attention. Someone film this so everyone can see what a liar she is. But then she saw where I was heading. She ran after me, heels clicking. You take one more step, she hissed. And I tell Ice about Carlos. Tonight, one phone call and your precious uncle is gone. I froze. Uncle Carlos raised us after Mom died. He wasn't documented. 2 minutes left. My vision was tunneling, dark creeping in from all sides. She grabbed my hair, yanking my head back. Blood from my nose dripped onto her white shoes. You know what your mother said when she was dying? Veronica whispered. Nothing, because she was weak, pathetic, just like you, leaving 2 brats behind for everyone else to deal with. 1 minute left. Crack. I slammed my head against hers as hard as I could. Her scream was piercing. My nose! You broke my nose! In her shock, she let go. I lunged for the red box by the kitchen door, smashing the glass with my elbow. Beep, beep, beep! The fire alarm shrieked. The sprinklers soaked everyone. You little shat! Veronica screamed through the blood, but fire alarms meant automatic 911 dispatch. No one could stop that. The last thing I heard was Bethany screaming, Mom, she's not breathing. You killed her. I woke up 3 days later in the ICU. They'd had to intubate me and cut open my throat so I could breathe. The scar would be permanent. The paramedics told me if I had waited 30 more seconds, I wouldn't have made it. After the, are you okay, I love you conversation, Ellie started crying. Addison, she whispered. They found out about Uncle Carlos. Veronica told them. When they arrested her, she told them everything. That's when I knew she had to go, by any means necessary. My hands grabbed the hospital bed rails so hard my knuckles went white. The machines next to me started beeping faster as my heart rate spiked. I tried to sit up, but the burning in my throat made me gasp and fall back against the pillows. The bandages on my neck felt wet and I reached up to touch them, but the nurse rushed in and grabbed my wrist. She checked the monitors and adjusted something on my IV drip while telling me I'd been out for 3 days, and the doctors had to cut my throat open to save my life. The tube they shoved down my throat left everything raw and swollen inside. Every swallow felt like broken glass sliding down. She showed me the call button and told me to press it if the pain got worse, then left to get the doctor. Ellie climbed onto the bed next to me, even though the nurse said not to, and buried her face in my shoulder, crying harder. Her whole body shook as she told me how the paramedics had to restart my heart in the ambulance, and how Dad wouldn't even ride with me to the hospital. She said Veronica got arrested at the wedding for what she did, but when the cops were putting her in the car, she screamed about Uncle Carlos not having papers. The cops called ICE right there, and they came to our apartment that same night. Carlos had just gotten home from the hospital after making sure I was stable, and they took him away in handcuffs. The detention center was 2 hours north, and they wouldn't let kids visit without a parent, and Dad refused to take us. My throat burned worse as I tried not to cry because crying made everything hurt more. The door opened, and a woman with gray hair and kind eyes walked in carrying a clipboard. She introduced herself as Renata Nunez from the hospital social services, and pulled a chair close to my bed. She asked Ellie to wait in the hall for a few minutes, which made my sister squeeze my hand before leaving. Renata explained that the hospital had to report what happened because a child almost died from medical neglect, and someone actively prevented me from getting help. She said Child Protective Services would investigate, and the police were already involved. She asked me to tell her everything I remembered about the wedding. I started from eating the cracker and realizing it had peanuts all the way through hitting the fire alarm. She wrote everything down and asked specific questions about who stopped me from getting my EpiPen and what exactly Veronica said. When I got to the part about Veronica threatening Carlos, she stopped writing and looked at me. She said that was witness intimidation on top of everything else. The next morning, Detective Edmund Odell showed up with a recorder and asked me to go through everything again. He already had the 911 call from when the fire alarm went off, and the paramedic report saying I was in full anaphylactic shock when they arrived. He said I would have died in less than a minute if they hadn't been so close. He showed me photos from the wedding on his tablet, asking me to identify who grabbed me and who blocked Ellie from getting my medication. I pointed out Veronica's family members, and he wrote down their names. He said several venue staff saw adults physically restraining children who were trying to help me, and one server heard Veronica say she wouldn't let me ruin her wedding. When he asked about Carlos, I told him about the threat, and he said that was a federal crime to threaten someone about immigration status while committing assault. The phone phone next to my bed rang that afternoon and Dad's name showed on the caller ID. I picked it up and before I could say anything, he started yelling about the medical bills and how the insurance company was asking questions. He said I'd ruined his life and destroyed his marriage with my drama and attention seeking. He never asked if I was okay or mentioned Carlos being taken. He just kept saying I was selfish and manipulative, just like my mother was. I hung up on him and unplugged the phone from the wall. Renata came back that evening with papers about discharge planning. She sat down and gently explained that going back to Dad's house probably wasn't safe given what happened and his reaction. She said Keith's parents had already called offering to take us in temporarily, while everything got sorted out with the courts. They had a spare room and lived in the same school district, so we wouldn't have to change schools. She said CPS would need to approve it, but she thought it was the best option. The next day, 2 nurses came in with a bag of practice EpiPens and made me and Ellie learn exactly how to use them. They showed us how to hold it with the orange tip down and swing it hard into the outer thigh and hold for 10 seconds. We practiced on foam blocks over and over until we could do it without thinking. They gave me 2 real ones to carry at all times and said the school would need to keep extras in 3 different locations. I wonder what's really going through Veronica's mind as she watches someone literally dying and still thinks they're faking it. The way she keeps insisting this is all for attention, while the kid's face is turning blue and blood is dripping from her nose, makes me curious about what kind of person can ignore such obvious physical signs. The nurse said I could never be without them again. A woman in a suit showed up saying she was the public defender assigned to help us and immediately told me not to post anything online about what happened. She said anything I wrote could be used against us in court. She handed me a notebook and told me to write down everything I remembered privately instead, with dates and times and who said what. I spent the next 2 hours filling pages with every detail I could remember while it was still fresh. She took photos of my neck bandages and the bruises on my arms from where people grabbed me. That evening, the hospital phone rang and a woman named Juliana Norwood introduced herself as an immigration attorney. She said she'd been contacted about Carlos's case and needed to meet with us as soon as possible. She explained that ICE detention was complicated and we'd need to gather lots of documents showing Carlos was a good guardian and had community ties. She said we'd need letters from teachers and neighbors and his employer saying he was responsible and took care of us. The bond hearing would happen soon and the amount would probably be high. She said we should start thinking about how to raise money because that was the only way to get him out while his case went through the system. Before I got discharged, a CPS investigator came to take my official statement and said they were opening a formal investigation. She said they'd already started interviewing wedding guests, and several people confirmed seeing adults physically prevent children from helping me during a medical emergency. The paramedic who saved me gave a statement saying I was minutes from death when he got there, and the venue staff said they saw Veronica and her family blocking access to my medication. The investigator said criminal charges were likely and warned me things would probably get complicated with Dad. Keith's mom showed up at the hospital the next morning with a minivan full of pillows and blankets and helped me sign the discharge papers while Ellie packed our stuff into plastic bags. The ride to their house took 40 minutes, and every bump in the road made my throat burn where they'd cut me open. Keith's dad had already moved their exercise equipment out of the guest room and set up 2 twin beds with matching blue comforters that smelled like fabric softener. His mom went through every cabinet in their kitchen, showing me where she'd put special stickers on anything that might have peanuts or was made in facilities that processed nuts. She'd bought 3 different brands of throat lozenges and protein shakes since I could barely swallow solid food yet. That first night, I tried to eat mashed potatoes, but it felt like swallowing broken glass. So I went back to the hospital nutrition shakes that tasted like chalk, but at least didn't hurt going down. The bathroom mirror showed the angry red line across my throat covered in surgical tape, and every time I saw it, my chest got tight, remembering how Mom's throat looked in her casket. Juliana came to the house 3 days later with a stack of papers about immigration law and sat at Keith's kitchen table explaining how ICE detention worked and why Carlos's case would be hard to win. She showed us statistics about bond amounts and success rates for people without documentation who'd been reported during criminal investigations. She said we needed letters from his boss at the auto shop and from our neighbors and teachers saying he was a good guardian who'd raised us responsibly since Mom died. The filing fees alone would be thousands of dollars before we even got to the bond hearing. Detective Odell called while I was doing my breathing exercises for my throat and asked if I had phone numbers for the other kids at the wedding who saw what happened. I told him I'd need to call their parents first to explain what he needed because I didn't want to just hand over kids' information without permission. He said he understood and gave me his direct line to call back when I had the parents' consent. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad saying he wanted to meet, but only if we came alone without any social workers or lawyers involved. I screenshot it immediately and forwarded it to Renata, who called me 10 minutes later saying absolutely not to meet him without supervision given what happened at the wedding. She said if he really wanted to see us, he could request supervised visits through proper channels. The school district sent someone to Keith's house with a laptop and textbooks so I could keep up with my junior year classes while recovering. The home instruction teacher came 3 times a week and sat at the dining room table helping me with calculus and chemistry while Ellie was at her regular school. It was weird doing school alone without the noise of other students or bells ringing between periods. Keith showed me his phone one evening, and there was Veronica's Instagram with professional wedding photos, where she'd cropped out the parts showing the chaos. Her caption said I'd tried to ruin her special day with a fake allergy attack for attention, just like I'd done at other family events. Her sister and cousins were commenting things like, some people can't stand to see others happy, and narcissistic teenagers these days will do anything for views. My hands shook as I scrolled through the comments from people who weren't even there believing her version. Juliana called that night after I'd sent her screenshots of the posts and told me not to respond or comment no matter how much I wanted to defend myself. She said anything I posted could be used against us in court or in Carlos's immigration case, so I needed to stay completely silent online. Instead, she had me write down names of everyone who knew Carlos was a good guardian, so we could ask them for support letters. The school counselor set up a video call on Keith's mom's laptop to check how I was doing and started explaining something called a 504 plan for when I came back to the school. She said they'd make sure I had a peanut-free table in the cafeteria and that every teacher would be trained on using EpiPens with extras stored in the main office and gym. She asked about my anxiety levels and whether I was sleeping okay, which I wasn't, but I said I was fine because I didn't want more adults worried about me. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, my phone lit up with another text from Dad saying if we didn't stop spreading lies about what happened, he'd cut off all contact with us permanently. He said we were destroying his life and his marriage with our attention-seeking behavior and that Mom would be ashamed of how we turned out. Reading those words felt like getting punched in the stomach because Mom would never have let someone hurt us the way Veronica did. 3 days later, Keith came running into the guest room holding his phone with this weird look on his face. He showed me the screen where his little sister had accidentally recorded part of the wedding chaos when she was trying to text their mom for help. The video was shaky and mostly showed the floor, but you could hear kids screaming and the fire alarm going off and then the sprinklers starting. The timestamp at the bottom matched exactly with when the 911 call went through according to what the paramedics told me. Keith helped me save the video to 3 different places, including sending it to my email and uploading it to a private cloud folder because we both knew evidence had a way of disappearing hearing when rich people like Veronica were involved. The next morning, I went to the courthouse downtown and filled out a public records request form for the 911 call audio and all the dispatch records from that night. The clerk behind the glass window said it would take 2 to 3 weeks to process, but I could pay an extra fee to rush it, which I did using money from my savings account. Having real documentation from official sources felt like building a wall brick by brick between Veronica's lies and what actually happened. That afternoon, my phone rang, and it was the venue manager calling to tell me their security camera system had automatically recorded over the footage from the wedding night because it only kept 7 days of video before wiping itself clean. He sounded sorry but not surprised, and I wondered if someone had told him to say that or if it was just bad luck that evidence kept disappearing right when we needed it most. 2 days later, a social worker from CPS showed up at Keith's house to interview Ellie separately about what happened at the wedding. Keith's mom took me to the backyard while they talked in the living room, and I spent the whole hour pacing back and forth worried that Ellie would get confused or scared and mess something up. But when the social worker came outside afterward, she told me Ellie did great and was very clear about what she saw and heard that night. She said Ellie's account matched what the other witnesses had said, and that her statement would be helpful for their investigation. That evening, Juliana called to say she'd filed the bond request for Carlos with the immigration court, but we needed character letters from people who knew him. She gave me a list of what to include, like how long they'd known him, and specific examples of him being a good guardian and community member. Keith's mom helped me make a list of everyone we could ask, including teachers and neighbors and people from church, and Carlos's boss at the auto shop where he worked. We spent hours calling people and explaining what we needed, and most of them said yes right away because everyone loved Carlos and knew how much he'd sacrificed to raise us after mom died. While Ellie was doing homework at the kitchen table, I sat on Keith's bed typing out my statement about what Veronica said to me while I was dying. My fingers kept freezing over the keyboard when I got to the part about her calling my mom weak and pathetic for dying and leaving us behind. Something feels off about that venue manager calling to say the security footage got wiped after exactly 7 days. What are the odds that crucial evidence disappears right when they need it? I had to stop 3 times to wipe my eyes and breathe through the anger that made my chest feel tight, but I forced myself to write every single word she said, including the threat about calling ICE on Carlos, because I knew this statement might be the only proof we had of what really happened in those final moments before I passed out. Late that night, I opened Instagram on Keith's laptop and typed out a message to Bethany asking if she was okay, and saying I understood if she couldn't talk to me right now. I kept it short and didn't mention anything about testifying or the case because I didn't want to pressure her or get her in trouble with her mom. The app showed she read it within 5 minutes, but she didn't reply, and I understood because being stuck between your parent and the truth is probably the worst place in the world to be. A week later, we all had to go to the courthouse for Veronica's criminal arraignment where she would enter her plea. The prosecutor had warned me she would probably plead not guilty and get released on bail, but hearing her say those words out loud while standing there in her designer suit made my stomach turn. The judge set conditions including no contact with me or Ellie, and staying at least 500 feet away from us at all times, but watching her walk out of the courtroom with her lawyer felt like watching a snake slither back into tall grass. Dad was there too, sitting on Veronica's side of the courtroom, and when we walked past him in the hallway, he turned his whole body away from us like we were strangers. Ellie reached for his arm, but he pulled away and walked faster to catch up with Veronica's family, who were all glaring at us like we'd ruined their lives. The rejection hurt worse than I expected, even though Renata had warned us he might act this way. Detective Odell caught up with us in the parking lot and asked if he could get permission to pull my phone records from the night of the wedding to verify the timeline. He had a consent form ready, and I signed it right there on the hood of his car, because I had nothing to hide and everything to gain from showing the truth. He said the records would show if I'd tried to call for help or text anyone about my allergic reaction, which would prove I wasn't faking it for attention like Veronica claimed. 3 days after the arraignment, Renata called to tell me that CPS had done their home visit to Dad and Veronica's house. She read parts of the report over the phone while I sat at Keith's kitchen table gripping my phone so hard my knuckles went white. The social worker wrote about how Dad kept looking at Veronica before answering any questions, and how Veronica interrupted constantly to speak for him. They noted the way Veronica had removed all photos of me and Ellie from the living room and replaced them with pictures from the wedding. The report used words like controlling dynamics and concerning power imbalance, which made me feel less crazy about everything that happened. That night around 11 when everyone was asleep, my phone buzzed with a message from Bethany on Instagram. I clicked on it expecting text, but found a voice message file attached with just 3 words typed underneath. I'm so sorry. My hands shook as I put in my earbuds and pressed play on the recording. Bethany's voice came through first, whispering that she was recording this secretly. Then I heard Veronica in the background talking to someone on the phone. She was laughing about how she'd threatened to call ICE on Carlos while I was dying, and how smart she was to use that against me. The recording was only 43 seconds long, but it had everything including Veronica saying my name and Carlos's name clearly. I played it 5 times, each time feeling my heart pound harder as I realized this was actual proof of what she'd done. My first instinct was to post it everywhere online and tag every news outlet I could think of. I opened Twitter and started typing a post, but then remembered what the public defender had said about not posting anything that could hurt the case. I called Juliana even though it was almost midnight, and she answered on the second ring sounding tired but alert. She told me to send the recording to Detective Odell immediately and not to post it anywhere or share it with anyone else. I forwarded the file to Odell's email with a short message explaining what it was and when Bethany had sent it to me. The next morning, I got a text from him saying he'd received it and would add it to the evidence file. 2 weeks passed before the school counselor called to schedule a meeting about my return to classes. She explained that word had spread about what happened at the wedding, and some parents were asking questions about safety protocols. She showed me anonymous comments from the school's parent Facebook group, where people were calling me dramatic and attention-seeking just like Veronica had. We spent an hour planning strategies for dealing with rumors, and she gave me scripts for responding to questions from classmates. She also arranged for me to enter and exit through the office instead of the main doors to avoid crowds. The same week, Juliana called with news that Carlos's ICE bond hearing had been scheduled for the following month. She explained that the judge would probably set the bond really high, maybe $50,000 or more, because that's what they always did. She said we should start thinking about fundraising in the community and maybe setting up a GoFundMe page. I spent that entire weekend going door to door collecting support letters for Carlos from everyone who knew him. His boss at the construction company wrote about how Carlos never missed a day of work in 8 years and always sent money home to his sick mother. Our neighbor Mrs. Tux wrote about how Carlos fixed her fence for free when her husband was in the hospital. My English teacher wrote about how Carlos came to every parent-teacher conference and always asked detailed questions about our education. The pastor at our church wrote about Carlos volunteering for the food bank every Saturday morning without fail. The school counselor wrote a factual letter describing how Carlos had attended every IEP meeting for Ellie's learning disability and advocated for her needs. By Sunday night, I had 23 letters in a folder that I gave to Juliana at her office Monday morning. The cease and desist letter from Veronica's lawyer arrived by certified mail on Tuesday. Thursday, while I was doing homework at the kitchen table. Keith's mom had to sign for it, and she handed it to me with worried eyes asking if everything was okay. The letter claimed I was spreading false allegations about Veronica and demanded I stop immediately or face legal action for defamation. It used big legal words but basically threatened to sue me if I kept telling people what really happened at the wedding. I took a photo of it and sent it to Juliana, who texted back immediately telling me to ignore it completely. She said it was just an intimidation tactic that lawyers used when they knew their client was guilty and had no real defense. 2 days later, Renata called with news that made me actually smile for the first time in weeks. CPS had made a preliminary finding of medical neglect and emotional abuse regarding Dad's actions during my allergic reaction. She read me the key parts about how he failed to provide necessary medical care and was ignored obvious signs of a life-threatening emergency. Within an hour, Dad was calling Renata's office phone over and over, leaving angry voicemails that she played for me later. He kept saying the findings were wrong and that I'd manipulated everyone but Renata stood by the report and told him the findings were final. The morning of Carlos's bond hearing arrived faster than I expected, and we all got up at 5 to make the 2-hour drive to the federal courthouse. The courtroom was cold and scary with armed guards everywhere, and a judge who barely looked at us the whole time. Juliana presented all our letters and argued that Carlos wasn't a flight risk, but the prosecutor kept talking about enforcement priorities. The judge set the bond at $75,000 and denied our request for release on recognizance or ankle monitoring. When he banged his gavel saying Carlos would remain detained, Ellie ran out of the courtroom sobbing uncontrollably. I found her in the bathroom throwing up from crying so hard and held her hair back while she kept saying it wasn't fair. I wanted to cry too, but forced myself to stay strong for her even though my chest felt like it was caving in. 3 days after that disaster, we had to go back to court for the temporary protection order hearing. The courtroom was smaller this time, and Veronica sat on the other side with her lawyer looking angry and put together in a new suit. When my turn came to testify, I had to stand at a podium and tell the judge everything that happened at the wedding. My voice shook and I had to stop twice to drink water, but I got through the whole story, including the thread about Carlos. The judge asked me specific questions about the timeline, and I answered as clearly as I could while avoiding looking at Veronica. When I finished, the judge granted the protection order for 6 months, and specifically warned Veronica about witness tampering. She had to stay at least 500 feet away from me and Ellie, and couldn't contact us in any way, including through other people. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Addison honey, we need to talk about this misunderstanding, please call me back Dad." I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds before taking a screenshot and forwarding it straight to Detective Odell with a note about the protection order violation. I didn't respond to Dad at all. Odell texted back within 5 minutes saying he'd handle it, and to keep documenting everything. Bethany sending that recording makes me wonder what finally pushed her to take such a risky step against her own mother. That must have taken real courage knowing what she'd face at home. 2 weeks passed before I felt ready to try going back to the school part-time. Keith's mom drove me there early Monday morning and walked me to the office to make sure all my paperwork was in order. The principal assured us they'd briefed all the staff about my medical needs and my new schedule. I only had to do mornings for now with the option to stay longer if I felt okay. Everything went fine through first and second period, but when I walked into the cafeteria for break, the smell hit me like a wall. Peanut butter. Someone had a PB&J sandwich 3 tables away and my body just reacted. My chest got tight and my hands started shaking and I couldn't breathe right even though I knew I hadn't eaten anything. The room started spinning and I grabbed the nearest table to steady myself, but that made everyone turn and stare at me. The nurse came running when someone told her I was having trouble, and she helped me to her office where I sat with my head between my knees trying to slow my breathing. She kept telling me I was safe and that it was just a panic attack, not an allergic reaction, but my body didn't believe her. It took 20 minutes before I could breathe normally again, and another 10 before I stopped shaking. The nurse called Keith's mom to pick me up early, and I felt so stupid and weak for not being able to handle a smell. The next day, we had the 5:04 plan meeting in the conference room with the principal and the nurse and the district coordinator and 2 teachers. They went through every detail of my allergy protocol and made sure everyone understood how to use an EpiPen. The nurse showed them the practice pen and made each person demonstrate they knew how to use it correctly. They designated a peanut-free table in the cafeteria and put up new signs about not sharing food. The coordinator said they'd send an email to all parents reminding them about severe allergies and asking them to avoid peanut products when possible. Having all these safety measures in place made me feel less anxious about being at the school, even though I still got nervous every time I walked past the cafeteria. That afternoon, Detective Odell called with good news. He'd gotten the audio file Bethany sent me and had their tech people verify it was authentic and unedited. The timestamp on the recording matched perfectly with the 911 dispatch logs from the wedding. He said the recording clearly captured Veronica threatening Carlos while I was having the allergic reaction, and that combined with all the witness statements made for a strong case. He sounded really confident, which gave me hope that Veronica would actually face consequences for what she did. 3 days later, Juliana drove me and Ellie to the ICE detention center to try visiting Carlos. We'd filled out all the paperwork and sent it in, but when we got to the front desk, the officer looked at his computer and shook his head. He said I wasn't on the approved visitor list yet, and that the application was still being processed. I asked how long it would take, and he said it could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months depending on the backlog. He explained I needed to register online first, and then wait for approval, and then schedule visits in advance. I felt so stupid for not knowing how the system worked, and for getting Ellie's hopes up about seeing Carlos. She cried the whole drive back, and I couldn't even comfort her properly because I was trying not to cry too. The next morning, Renata called with better news. CPS had approved our kinship placement with Keith's family for at least 6 months with the possibility of extension if needed. She said they'd done the home study and background checks and everything looked good. Keith's parents had already told us we could stay as long as we needed, but having it official made it real. When I told Ellie, she started crying again, but this time from relief. Keith's mom hugged us both and said we were family now, and that she'd already started the paperwork to get us on their insurance. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from Bethany. She said her mom's lawyer had been asking her questions about the wedding, and she was scared. She wrote that she might testify if she got subpoenaed, but she was terrified of what her mom would do to her. I texted back that I understood completely, and that she should do whatever kept her safe. I told her she'd already helped more than she knew by sending me that recording, and that I didn't want her getting hurt because of me. She sent back a heart emoji and then nothing else. The school counselor scheduled my first therapy appointment for Thursday afternoon. I sat in her office for 5 minutes before I could even start talking. She asked me to tell her about the wedding, and I tried, but kept having to stop and drink water. When she asked about my mom dying the same way, I completely broke down. I hadn't cried about mom in years, but sitting there trying to explain how it felt to almost die exactly like she did made everything come flooding back. The counselor just sat there and let me cry without trying to make me feel better or tell me it was okay. She said we'd take things slow and that there was no rush to talk about everything at once. It was harder than I expected to be that vulnerable with someone I'd just met. 2 days later, Graham Oates, the prosecutor on Veronica's case, filed a motion with the court about witness intimidation. He included the cease and and desist letter from Veronica's lawyer and Dad's text trying to contact me, and asked the judge for stricter bail conditions. He wanted Veronica to have a curfew and to be prohibited from any contact with witnesses even through third parties. He took the threat seriously, which made me feel less alone in this whole mess. Meanwhile, Juliana was working on a bond redetermination motion for Carlos. She'd gathered letters from 15 more people in the community, including our pastor, and 3 of Carlos's co-workers and his boss from the restaurant. She also had documentation showing he'd been in the country for 12 years and had never been arrested or even gotten a traffic ticket. She seemed cautiously optimistic that we could get the bond amount reduced to something we could actually afford. The next morning, Renata called with news about Dad and the CPS investigation. She explained that Dad would need to complete a service plan if he wanted to see Ellie again, and all visits would have to be supervised by a court-approved monitor at a special facility downtown. The plan included parenting classes, anger management sessions, and individual counseling to address why he'd let me almost die at his own wedding. Ellie listened on speakerphone, twisting Keith's mom's dish towel in her hands until her knuckles turned white. Renata said the supervision wasn't perfect, but at least someone would be watching to make sure nothing bad happened during visits. 3 days later, Graham Oates called to tell me the preliminary hearing was set for next Thursday at 9 in the morning. He wanted to meet with me that afternoon to practice my testimony, so Keith's mom drove me to the courthouse where we spent 2 hours in a small conference room going over every possible question. Graham made me describe the wedding over and over, asking the same questions different ways until I could answer without my voice shaking or tears starting. He showed me where I'd sit in the courtroom and explained how Veronica's lawyer might try to confuse me or make me look like a liar. We practiced breathing exercises for when I felt panic rising in my chest. He had me tell the story 15 times until the words came out steady and clear, even though my hands still shook under the table. That night, I sat at Keith's kitchen table trying to write my victim impact statement on his mom's laptop. I typed out everything I wanted to say about Veronica, including detailed fantasies about her rotting in prison forever and losing everything she cared about. The first draft was 3 pages of pure rage about how she'd almost killed me and destroyed our family. Keith's mom read it over my shoulder and gently suggested I might want to tone it down since the judge would see it. I deleted the revenge parts and rewrote it, focusing on how scared I'd been, how the scar on my throat reminded me every day of almost dying, and how Ellie had nightmares about losing me like we'd lost Mom. The final version was only 1 page, but Graham said it was powerful enough to make an impact. 2 days before the hearing, Dad called Keith's house phone at dinner time. Keith's dad answered and handed it to me with a worried look. Dad started with this weak apology about how things got out of hand at the wedding, but before I could even respond, he switched to demanding I tell everyone I'd been exaggerating about what happened. He said I needed to recant my lies about Veronica trying to hurt me and tell the prosecutor it was all a misunderstanding. He kept saying she was a good person who just got stressed on her wedding day and that I was destroying his life with my drama. My hands shook as I held the phone, but I managed to say no in a clear voice before hanging up. Keith's mom immediately called Graham to report the contact violation while I sat at the table trying to stop shaking. That same evening, Bethany texted me from a number I didn't recognize. She wrote that her mom's lawyer had been pressuring her about her testimony, but she wasn't going to lie if they made her take the stand. She said she'd tell the truth about the recording and what she saw at the wedding even though she was scared of what her mom would do when she found out. She wrote that seeing me almost die had changed something in her, and she couldn't pretend it didn't happen. I texted back that she was brave and that I respected her for doing the right thing even when it was hard. Thursday morning came too fast, and suddenly I was sitting in the courtroom wearing the only nice outfit Keith's mom could find that would hide my throat scar. Keith's parents already starting insurance paperwork before the kinship placement was even official makes me curious about their real motivations here. Dad calling to demand she recant her lies, while Veronica's facing charges seems like strange timing. I wonder if someone's coaching him on what to say. The room smelled like old wood and floor cleaner, and the bench where the judge would sit looked huge and intimidating. Graham sat next to me at the prosecutor's table while Veronica and her lawyer sat across the aisle. She wore a conservative gray suit and had her hair pulled back in a bun, looking nothing like the screaming bride who'd let me die. The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge, an older woman with short gray hair, started reading through the charges. When the EMT took the stand, my whole body tensed up. He described finding me unconscious with my airway almost completely closed, saying I was minutes from brain damage or death when they got there. He explained how they'd had to perform an emergency tracheotomy right there on the venue floor because my throat was too swollen for normal intubation. He said in his 20 years as a paramedic, he'd rarely seen someone so close to death from anaphylaxis who survived. His testimony made me relive those final moments before I passed out, and I used the breathing exercises Graham taught me to keep from having a full panic attack right there in court. After the EMT stepped down, Graham called Bethany to the stand. She looked terrified walking up there in her school uniform, not making eye contact with her mom. Graham asked her about the recording, and she confirmed in a small voice that she'd made it on her phone during the wedding. He played it for the court, and everyone heard Veronica's voice clear as day saying she'd call ICE on Carlos while I was dying on the floor. The judge's face changed completely when she heard Veronica threaten to have Carlos deported while refusing to let anyone help me. Even Veronica's lawyer looked uncomfortable, shuffling his papers and whispering urgently to his client. When the recording ended, the courtroom was dead silent for a moment before the judge asked Bethany if that was really her mother's voice. Bethany said yes and started crying. After all the testimony, the judge didn't hesitate to extend the no-contact order for the maximum time allowed. She warned Veronica that any attempt at witness tampering would result in immediate jail time, and added stricter bail conditions including electronic monitoring and a curfew. She said the evidence presented showed clear danger to minor children, and that the court would not tolerate any violations. For the first time since the wedding, I felt like maybe the system would actually protect us instead of letting Veronica get away with everything. The next week was Carlos's bond redetermination hearing at the immigration court downtown. Juliana had gathered 37 support letters from people in our community, plus documentation showing Carlos had been here 12 years without any arrests or problems. The judge reviewed everything while we sat in the gallery holding our breath. After 40 minutes of arguments from both sides, the judge announced he was reducing the bond from $50,000 to $15,000. It was still a huge amount, but suddenly it felt possible to raise it instead of completely hopeless. Juliana started making calls right there in the courthouse hallway. Within 3 days, our church had raised $8,000 through donations and bake sales. Keith's parents took out a loan for $5,000, and Carlos's boss at the restaurant put up the final $2,000. The community came together in a way I'd never seen before, with people who barely knew us contributing whatever they could. A week later, I stood outside the detention center with Ellie and Juliana waiting for Carlos to walk out. When the door finally opened and he came through wearing an ankle monitor but smiling, Ellie ran straight into his arms, sobbing while I stood there trying not to completely break down in the parking lot. Back at Keith's house that night, Carlos sat us down on the couch and pulled us both into a tight hug that lasted forever. His ankle monitor pressed against my leg through his jeans. He smelled like the detention center soap, and his eyes looked tired, but he was here, and that's all that mattered. Mija, I need you to promise me something, he said quietly. I nodded nodded against his shoulder. No revenge, no tricks, nothing illegal against that woman or your father. His hands gripped my shoulders as he looked straight at me. We do this the right way through the courts and lawyers. I wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me cold. He'd just spent weeks locked up because of Veronica's call to ICE, and here he was telling me to take the high road. My fist clenched, but I nodded because what else could I do when he was looking at me like that? The next morning, Graham called while I was eating cereal at Keith's kitchen table. He explained that Veronica's lawyer had rejected every plea deal they'd offered, which meant we were definitely going to trial. It'll be months of waiting and stress, but at least everything will come out in court, he said. I wrote down all the dates he gave me on the calendar Keith's mom had stuck to the fridge. 3 days later, Renata showed up with a stack of papers for Keith's parents to sign. CPS was making the kinship placement official for at least 6 months with options to extend if needed. She also confirmed that Dad would only get supervised visits with Ellie at the CPS office downtown if he completed his parenting classes and anger management first. Ellie sat next to me on the bed that night, crying about not being able to see Dad like normal anymore. I rubbed her back and reminded her it was for our safety, but she still cried herself to sleep. School started feeling more normal after the counselor got my 504 plan fully set up with 3 EpiPens stationed around campus. One stayed in the nurse's office, another in the main office, and the third in my homeroom teacher's desk drawer. They trained all the staff during a special meeting and even did a practice drill with an expired pen and a dummy. Walking through the halls knowing there were EpiPens everywhere made my chest feel less tight for the first time since the wedding. The therapist's office smelled like vanilla candles and had those white noise machines that made ocean sounds. She gave me a notebook to track my triggers and asked me to write down 3 coping strategies before our next session. I sat in Keith's room that night staring at the blank pages trying to figure out how to explain that peanut butter commercials made me want to throw up now. 2 weeks passed before Ellie finally slept through a whole night without waking up screaming about the wedding. I watched her from my bed across the room as she breathed steady and calm with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. My body stayed tense waiting for her to jolt awake, but she just kept sleeping peacefully until morning. Keith's mom found me an old camcorder at a garage sale, and I started recording myself talking about everything that happened. Not for court or evidence, but just to get it out of my head and into something real. I sat in the bathroom with the door locked and whispered the whole story from the beginning while the camera's red light blinked at me. Talking to the camera felt easier than talking to the therapist somehow. By Sunday night, I had the whole month mapped out on my calendar with different colored pens. Red for court dates, blue for Carlos's ICE check-ins, green for therapy appointments, and yellow for school stuff. Dad had texted 6 times asking when we were coming home, but I never answered. We weren't going back to that house ever again if I had anything to say about it. Carlos helped me understand that fighting through proper channels was the only way to really win this. We were safe at Keith's house. We had lawyers and social workers on our side, and we were going to get through this together even if it took months or years to finish. Appreciate you hanging out and wondering through all these questions with me today. It's always interesting sharing the ride together. I'll see you in the next one. And hey, if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.